Exploring the culture, adventure, and impact of martial arts. That's what we do at Kung Fu Podcasts. I'm your host, Sifu T.W. Smith, episode 24. This program is for you, the martial arts practitioner, teacher, or just someone who is curious about martial arts. And whether you practice for health, show, combat, cultural reasons, or for the lifestyle that martial arts encourages you to have. It's my intent that this program will provide you some solid information, a good story from time to time, and most of all, encourage you to keep your practice alive. This particular podcast today, number 24, is going to be a slight crossover with Tibetan Kung Fu. I prepared separate intros for both Kung Fu podcasts and the podcast of Tibetan Kung Fu with segments specific to each show, which I will put up in front just in case you listen to both podcasts. Then the main topic, Martial Arts Intent and Routines 2015, is the same for each program this week, and it's the last 31 and a half minutes of this particular podcast. The artwork for this episode, the solar system, it looks random, and that's part of the reason why I picked it. It just looks random, planets located out there around the sun. But then I wondered, why is it called a system? How is something that appears to be random be a system? In today's podcast, I want to go through the connections we made over the past week, an update on one of our previous stories, episode 21, RQE Wong, intentions for Kung Fu Podcast this year, 2015. Then I want to talk about Tumblr for a moment. Then the crossover will begin, and that's where we'll talk about 5 actions to develop in your martial arts direction in 2015. I'll give you 4 rooms that you can kind of go look into to see if you can find the reasons for your practice. What is periodization and how I apply it to my Kung Fu training? The 2 spirits that every martial artist is responsible for honing. And then my personal Kung Fu intentions and routines for 2015. On Facebook, we connected with one of my favorite stars from the movies, Mr. Bolo Young. We also connected with the World Combat Association, and I'm looking forward to learning more about everything that they do and how we can support their work. And then Benji Huffine also connected. And Benji, if you're listening to the program, thank you very much. And over on Twitter, Mr. Don Smith and William Smith also connected with us. We're getting together our YouTube videos, and I'm going to be putting some of those things out for you here very soon as well. I want to take a moment and say thank you. Thank you to each one of you. Kung Fu Podcast started July 25th, 2014 with the Kung Fu Arrives in Europe. And some of you have listened to every show, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share with you, to express myself, and some of the others that I've learned from, people like Mr. Ben Junkins, Ian Abernathy, and you, the listener, who've communicated to me through Facebook, emails, and now even a couple of texts here and there. I really appreciate you all taking the time to share with me your thoughts, your interests, and being a part of this program means a lot to me. I believe in general that the show is progressing, the audio quality, the formatting of the show. I'm getting better at it. I've got some of the future episodes already planned out, and I'm looking forward to putting those together and setting things up so that you have more input. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit later. That reminds me, if you haven't signed up, get over there on the newsletter. You'll see a little button there, sign up for the newsletter. Or if you sign up as a content member, then you're automatically going to get a special newsletter from me once a month or whenever I need input from the content members. An update on RQE Wong. Episode 21. I got an email from a gentleman who preferred that I kept his name out, so I'm going to do that. A very sincere young man, and it's been a real privilege to get to know you. And I'm looking forward to having more communication with you over the course of time. In episode 21, I presented Ben Junkins' essay regarding RQE Wong. He was the first Chinese martial artist to be on the cover of Black Belt magazine in January 1965. RQE Wong shepherded the opening of a new era in Western Kung Fu. And I received the message that let me know that Siming Ma is Ark Wong's grandson and continues to practice the system and his website is at the kungfu5family.com. That's one word, number 5, kungfu5family.com. And I was informed that RQE Wang was born on the first month, the 11th day, in the 28th year of the Emperor Guangxu of the Qing dynasty, which converts to 1902, February 28th. And he goes on to say, but I'm not sure the 28th is the correct converted day. There were several questions about the birthday, and he wanted to point that out. And he wrote, quote, it was his great-great-grandfather set the Kung Fu learning family rule. Ark Wang never said Lam Ark Fong was a Choi Li Foot Sifu, end quote. Thank you very much for the update, and I would encourage any of you all that if we present something that you think you could add to, I would love to get it. I know Ben appreciated the note, and what I'm going to do with updates is I will post them on the original page. So it won't be on this page. I'll go back to the page on RQE Wang, and I will present this information as an update, an addendum to that page. I'm starting to use Tumblr a little bit. I like how versatile and flexible it is, and also that I can add so much to it so quickly. I wanted you to know that, so in case you ever wanted to follow some of the things that we're doing, I'm posting almost everything there, TibetanKungFu.tumblr.com. I wrote a few people, and Miss Andrea Harkins, the martial arts woman, sent me some of her goals for 2015. Now, by the time I was done reading it, I was tired. And I told her I was just couldn't believe everything she had planned. So I thought I'd give you a couple of bullets of what she told me she'd like to do. I'd like to write for my local newspaper, take an aerobic workout at least 2 times per week outside of teaching karate, a new martial arts skill or certificate program. I want to pick up weightlifting 3 times a week, lose 10 pounds, write a print-on-demand book. Let me get a little water here. Good stuff. Help to motivate others, and she just kept going. Andrea is a self-proclaimed, self-diagnosed overachiever, and I would believe it after reading her 3 pages of everything she's going to get done this year. The intentions of Kung Fu Podcast. Well, in comparison to Andrea's list, ours is small, to say the least. But continue to work with some of the fine folks like Ben Junkins, Andrea Harkins, Ian Abernathy, on promoting the awareness of the impact that martial arts can have to not just ourselves personally, but to any of us. I want to dig deeper into the research and share what I find in more creative ways. I want to develop things such as screencast videos, mapping with timelines, and more. I want to be able to provide some of this information in a more educational and fun format, and to be honest with you, to take some of the fine work that people like Mr. Junkins and some of the other folks in the journals and all are doing, and put it in a way that we can digest it, we can share it. I want my son, who's 11, to be able to enjoy it and to learn why he's having fun. I want to broaden out the scope to geographical reasons. What are some of the famous places that are associated with martial arts? What was their culture then? What's their culture now? What is the news there today? What is the current state of martial arts in various parts of the globe? I've reached out to the Navy SEALs. I continue to train with military, former military, and law enforcement officers, and people that use their training to combat criminals, enemies, and just to survive sometimes. What about the scope of Kung Fu Podcast? Where does the mist of Kung Fu Podcast reach? Modern-day martial arts tends to lend itself to solo and usually officiated sport. What about teams, families, strategies, weapons? I have a lot to do. Most of all, I want to continue the passion of sharing. I've had a pleasure of getting introduced to some magnificent people around the globe, and I want you to hear about what they're doing and what they're trying to do. Some are big personalities in the martial arts world or entertainment. Others are not as known, but their impact is like a laser. It cuts right into people's lives and makes changes. And as a reminder, we still have the MartialPodcast.com holder. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. I've been toying with the thoughts of making it more about the associations and news and events. Things like the World Combat Association is one I'd like to offer more awareness and support to. I want this program to continue to improve my delivery, my skills, my research, and sharing. So that's the intent and goals for Kung Fu Podcast in 2015. As a reminder, this week I sent out an email with the links and the information so that you could download the MP3 files of 8 short meditations. If you want to become a content member, you can go to patreon.com/Kung Fu Podcast and contribute there and become a member. And now the crossover will begin. 5 actions to developing your martial art intentions for 2015. Intention is something that you have a deep resolve to change or to take a direction in. It was time for me to evaluate my martial arts progress and my intentions. Most of my students know that I go through seasons that in physiology we call periodizations. A periodization was something that was developed in the 1970s, if I remember correctly, and it's a way of training athletes so that they stay not just physically at their best, but mentally sharp. What happens is they find that when athletes go through the same sort of programs, no matter how good the program is, they become stagnant. So having a plan throughout the course of a year allows the athletes to do their best. So as a bodybuilder, for example, we would have a mass phase where you're just trying to stack on muscle mass. Then you would have a tapering phase where you're trying to shape yourself up into a little bit. Then a rip phase, and you go through these different phases, posing and all this other stuff where your focus is always changing a little bit so that you're making progress as a bodybuilder. If you're a football player, it was the same thing. You had preseason training. You had in-season training. You had postseason training. You had a little off-season training in the sense that you would have little weeks here, little weeks there, and that's not always the same. If you were a football player, you were always training to be a football player. If you're a bodybuilder, you were always training to be a bodybuilder. If you're a martial artist, you're always practicing to be a martial artist. If you're practicing your Kung Fu for health, for example, you're always practicing for your health. You never really take a break from it. You just take different approaches to achieve certain things, and during that phase, your attention is very directed. That keeps you mentally and physically sharp. Now, when I learned Kung Fu, we were taught in a very similar way as periodization. We would work on something for a long while, 6 months to a year or so. We'd put it down and work on something else. So we might go from Hop Guard to Xing Yi, then from Xing Yi to Bakwa. Because the effort there was you were learning to be a martial arts practitioner. You weren't learning to be a Bakwa practitioner. You used the Bakwa as a resource of learning, make yourself better, learning the Xing Yi. And what I realized is that many folks try to learn how to perfect a style rather than learning how to perfect themselves. The styles are tools. You are the richness of the source. You are the reason for the practice. So using a periodization model, I designed over the course of years different ways for me to focus on my training, and I thought I'd share some of that with you as part of this program today. To do that, here's what I go through. First is intent. As I said a few moments ago, intent is a deep resolve to do something. It's a direction. It does not have a real destination. For example, you never stop trying to be a better dad, as if you have arrived to someplace and now you're no longer going to work on it. The same is true for martial arts, health, or even just being a good friend. What if you are unsure of your intent, your general direction? What are you practicing for? Well, I put together my sub-checklist, and these are literally things that I had written down over the course of years. These are not the steps of progression. Think of them as rooms inside of a big house that you could just go look in to see what you find. You want to enjoy or practice your martial arts. What for? Now, this room, you might find you want to practice for show, for health, for combat, cultural experience, philosophical understanding. Maybe you want to practice for self-awareness, community, being around other folks. or combinations of all that. Any of those are fine. Just try to nail one or two down so that you have some general direction. This is probably by far the most important step in all of your training, having a decent idea about what you're trying to do. Confusion here will only muddy the waters real badly. So if you're practicing for sport, don't confuse that for practicing for combat, because practicing with rules and a referee is a lot different than facing a convict. I began my training in martial arts with one simple motivating force, and it was something that drove me into trying to learn. I didn't know what was going to be expected of me, but I knew this was what I was looking for. When I was asked why I wanted to learn Kung Fu, I was very clear in my response. I need to get to know myself. I am absolutely tired of making the same mistakes. I'm tired of asking myself, how did I end up here again? I became aware that I was the common denominator in all the events in my life. If you're involved in martial arts, honing in on any one of these following things, and perhaps even using a periodization model to encompass several of them, may be useful. Now, here's what I have cycled through over the course of time, and I still make sure that I blend them into my training. So I might practice for health, which might be my weight, make sure I'm staying as fit as I can. Sometimes that slides a little bit more than it should, but I've done a lot better. My breathing, stretching, painful. Joints and my strength. Sometimes I put more on my lifestyle, moving right, mental clarity, lifestyle discipline, attitude discipline. Physical interpretation. This is a lot of fun. This is one of my, what I call playtime. Applying expressions. I learn these techniques, these strategies, these expressions. And even if my students or myself are just practicing for health, for example, at any given time, learning how to express yourself and what you might be doing or how you could possibly use some things is helpful. You don't necessarily have to get in there and beat each other up in order to get some idea, okay, this is what this is used for, without any preconceived idea that you could actually use it. We kind of draw the line right there. It just gives you an understanding this is how you might be able to express this particular technique or strategy. How about your spiritual development? Things like self-discipline, getting yourself grounded, humility, self-honesty, developing the qualities of attention, for example, concentration on one end, mindfulness and awareness on the other. Your spiritual development can have a lot of different pieces of it. It's hard to be very spiritual if you can't be grounded. You can go through there and see if there's any particular thing that resonates with you. How about your conditioning? Your aerobic and anaerobic stamina. Know which one you're working for, which one's most important to you. We also use the wooden poles, the mukjong, wooden men, blocks, moki pai, wire whips, heavy bags, iron palm training, bone conditioning, two-man exercises, weapons work like long staff and things like that. Those are all part of the conditioning, being able to use those types of tools and also guidelines so that you're progressing through your training. How about your show and demonstration? That's important as well. I'm not saying that you're necessarily always training for the movies, and if you are and you make it big, don't forget me. But practice in your show that you present yourself well. For demos, or how about just your forms, that you're going through your forms? That's part of show as well, presentation. Nothing wrong with that at all. Your combat. Whatever you're practicing for, when it comes down to combat, you could be practicing combat for sport, combat for military situations, combat for law enforcement, combat just to be street savvy. And then also having a time that you put in an emphasis on self-protection, life preservation skills, and avoiding trouble. So in summary of answering that question, what am I practicing for? I listed health, lifestyle, physically interpreting your work, spiritual development, conditioning, show, combat, and self-protection. What is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 8 areas right there. Now for the next possibility, my background in wrestling helped me understand work ethic. If you've ever been a wrestler, most of them will tell you that it's the longest 6 to 8 minutes that you will ever have in your life. and you will work for hours every week for that 1 6-minute match. In football, all the way up through college, had doused most of my fears about having collisions and bruising. But nothing had prepared me for what it was going to take to achieve what I said, what I wanted. And that was, I wanted to get to know myself. So that leads to number 2. If you have an idea where you're going, number 2 is that you have to open your mind to what it's going to take for you to achieve your intent. This is a slippery area, and I put it on 2 slopes. On slope 1, how many times do you know what to do and you just don't do it? We all know that poor eating, excessive drinking, behaving like a knucklehead, and other misguided behaviors has repercussions. Yet, you might continue with the habit and expect some miracle of a different result. So we know what we need to do or not do, and then lack the motivation or implementation to do it. The other slope is the innocent ignorance of the requirements. And this is where a good teacher will hold you accountable to fulfilling your goal. I know that if you're locked in a McDojo system where it's just about one more belt, one more stripe or whatever it is they do, one more test, then a lot of times you don't have an emphasis on mindset. Or they teach you that the only way to protect yourself is to fight. Perhaps there's not as much emphasis on real conditioning or teamwork or practical weapons and tools. Now in the McDojo system, you're at a minimum not pursuing a well-rounded objective. Now if that's your intent, then that's fine, so be it. You should just remember that everything has a cost and a price that you will pay. When you get far enough out of balance, it is going to come to collect. So if you practice fighting all the time and you don't balance it out with a good mindset of peacefulness and harmony and doing gentle and kind acts for others, you will pay a price eventually. That much I promise you. So when trying to find your direction for 2015, so far we got be clear about what you're training for, and then open your mind to what it's going to take, whether it is you know what to do and not to do and you're not doing it, or you may not know what you need to work on. Which leads me to number 3. Accept your challenges and find your way. No teacher, preacher, sifu, sensei, or therapist will be able to help you more than you want to be helped. A good program will challenge you somewhere along the way. Maybe it's making you evaluate how you live, drinking, smoking, exercising, how you eat, etc. Maybe it's your mental awareness of slowing down, being conscious. Perhaps it's in overcoming fears, and I don't just mean sparring and fighting. What I'm talking about are the real fears, the one that eat on you. Fear of failing, fear of being embarrassed, fear of not being number one, fear of being number one. There's a laundry list of fears that we have to work through, and if you're in a good program at some point, you may have to face one of them. You're going to have to dig deep when it is time and accept that certain challenges are supposed to come or you're not going to make any gains. And your sifu, your sensei, their guidance will provide you encouragement, a voice of experience, and in some cases, just be a cheerleader. Part of finding your intent in training is finding where you want and need to work. Accept your challenges as opportunities and you'll make tremendous gains. If you are starting an art or even accomplished in your art, here's another idea that I've used and taught in my training, and I'm going to start by telling you a couple of little stories. Keyshawn Johnson was the first pick in the 1996 draft by the New York Jets. After one season, his coach, one of my favorites, Bill Parcells, didn't feel that Keyshawn was living up to all the hype. Parcells spoke with his assistant coaches, who said that Keyshawn didn't have the speed to separate from defenders. Parcells preferred to focus on what a player could do, not on what a player couldn't. So he pulled Keyshawn over to the side and he told him, "Look, you're not Marvin Harrison. You are mentally tough, you are strong, and you are big. You can snatch the ball. You are not fast. You are not a gazelle. You are a giraffe. Quit trying to be a gazelle. Convince the quarterback to throw you the ball when you are covered, because you are going to be covered. You can't get away from anybody. So be a great giraffe." When I'm working with myself or with students, I really do try to help them identify their natural skill sets: speed, range, cleverness, patience, quickness, tenacity, etc. Then work toward that. Make that one of your first intentions to use your natural skills. Develop other supportive skill sets along the way. So, for example, anytime that you see that you're facing someone tall and lanky, you have the skill sets to either lure them out or to get inside. If you're a stronger person, then use pressure. It helps. Make sure that you're working on your natural skill sets first and your supplemental skill sets second. In Keyshawn's case, speed was a secondary skill set. On a personal note, I was a pretty good high school wrestler. Not great, but I was pretty good. Good enough to be offered a couple of scholarships to wrestle in college. My sophomore and junior years, I sometimes wrestled at 185. When I wrestled at 185 pounds, I could use my strength against most other wrestlers at that weight class. But occasionally, my senior classmate would wrestle at 185, and I would have to wrestle at heavyweight. Now, back then, in the early 1980s and late 1970s, most of the guys weighed anywhere from 260 to 300 pounds at heavyweight. The first time I tried to man up against a heavyweight, I got crushed, and I mean crushed. I would encourage you to learn from my shortcoming. Even though my coach had already tried to warn me that I wasn't going to be able to use my strength on these guys, that was my primary natural skill set. But in certain cases, I had to learn supplemental gifts and other strategies. I had to learn how to avoid facing my opponent's strength and use my gifts at other times. In Kung Fu training, there's a proverb that says, "A tiger will fight with no fear. He's never hunted by any other animal." However, when two tigers meet, one is killed, the other is maimed. So if you are naturally fighting like a tiger and you meet another tiger, your better bet may be fighting like the crane. Rely on the supplemental gifts of accuracy and speed. So if you're tall and lanky, practice keeping people at range first. Learn to fight in tight second. If you practice for good health and self-awareness, and your meditation practice is easiest for you by using visualization, then use it to settle your mind. Then supplement it later with concentration or awareness. By accepting that you will have natural skills, then you should also be prepared that you're going to have natural challenges. One comes with the other, and that can help you find a direction. Number 4, check where you are going. Work in the right direction. If you will periodically check your status, and that means every 2 weeks, every 2 months, some time zone, you take the time to assess what has occurred, what you've observed. It is common for many students to get into the comparing themselves to others and their progress. That's never going to be good. They sometimes forget what they have learned that doesn't work is just as important as learning what does work. So that's the closing of my sublist of finding your direction or your intent for your training. Everything I just went through, be clear about what you're training for: health, lifestyle, self-awareness, cultural experiences. Or open your mind to what it may take for you to achieve your intent. You may have the knowledge, but it needs more implementation. Or you may need the knowledge and implementation. Except that you'll have challenges. Find your way and be prepared for those challenges. That can give you a sense of direction and intent in your program. Check where you're going. Work in natural directions first. Avoid comparing yourself to others and compare yourself to you. And if you're not quite sure, look at what doesn't work for you, and that may help you find what does work for you or other possibilities that may work for you. So let's say you've established that. You've got a good intent. You have a good idea of what you're practicing for. Part 2 is your routines. Now, I use the word routines and not habits. And the reason is just sheerly based on their definition. The definition of a routine is a sequence of actions regularly followed versus a habit, which is by definition a settled or regular tendency. A habit suggests this unconscious behavior, where routine suggests a conscious behavior, your awareness, and as we said before, your mindset matters. Conscious acts that are pointed in the direction of your intent. So, for example, if you want to hear my son's routine, that I believe he was 10 at the time, we established a little program for him at home. It's called Boots on the Ground. And then he came on to one of the Tibetan Kung Fu podcasts, episode number 4, and we shared that so that you had an idea of our priority system for him each day. He got into the routine until it became just part of his regular effort. It was a conscious act of going through a sequence of priorities that helped him establish that. Your routine can have periodization built into the program. You can have a set of time that is dedicated to certain emphasis in your work, making sure that you've allotted an appropriate amount of time to come in and out of it. Whether you're working on your speed, your flexibility, perhaps a specific technique that you want to make sure that you do very well in. Maybe it's in your form. You have a set aside a time and a time period in order to work on it. Just remember that the real stuff, and I mean the real stuff in your martial arts, takes more soaking. You may have to work on certain parts of your routine longer or more often than others. For example, hitting a bag isn't hard. It's not that it's easy, it's just that in relative terms, it's not nearly as hard as learning how to keep your mind calm when you're engaged with someone else. That takes work, real work, and it takes more soaking. So make sure that your routines are set up, that you have plans that they're active, they're dedicated, committed, and that you also have time that is planned to take time off from it. So we have our intent and our routines. Now, our milestones. Milestones for me are what I call symbols of change. For example, when you get on the scales and you've lost 5 pounds, or you've gotten below that threshold that you set for yourself. Other milestones could be in your strength, speed, awareness, your ability to be quiet, your ability to learn to respond versus reacting. These are all symbols of change. One of my personal milestones was when the first time I was standing there and I was blindfolded and I snatched a fly out of the air. It first was astonishing to me that I did it, but since then, my son and several of the students have seen me standing there and a fly comes by and I reach up and snatch it out of the air. I tell you that because it really was a milestone for me going, wow, an empty mind can actually respond much faster than one. If I'd have thought about trying to catch that fly and then doing it, I'd have never got it. I know because I tried 1,000 times. It was only when I didn't think about it and I just did it at one time, then the thought and the action became one. And the first time I achieved that, that was a milestone. I found that I do better with milestones if I make them yin. And by that, what I mean is that I don't focus on them. I'm aware of them, but then I focus on the things that are going to help me get there as yang. So, for example, if I focus on my weight, so if I say, okay, well, I need to be at 190 pounds. Well, if I weigh in one day and I'm at 196, I get frustrated. But that shouldn't be the case. I find that I do better going, okay, I weighed in at 196. I need to be focused on my lifestyle, not my weight. Because if I focus on my lifestyle, the weight will come right where it's supposed to be. It's always been that way. If you find that you get yourself in a pinch because you focus on the milestone, then focus on what it takes to achieve the milestone, and then the milestone will come. You can set your routine up to periodically check for milestones. Again, getting on the scales, doing drills, tests, exams, 2-man exercises, obstacle courses. There are so many things that you could do to periodically check for milestones to see where you are. So that's 3 of the 5 actions you can take to developing your martial art training in 2015. Find a good intent, set up good routines, observe and prepare yourself, put yourself in a position to observe milestones. Number 4, your mindset matters. How you think matters, because your mind and your body are interconnected. Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, said, "If a man believes he can or can't, he is right." Most actions we take, particularly subconscious ones, are guided by what you believe. Your beliefs fuel your thoughts guide your actions. So if you believe that you're going to get in a situation and just do it and you've never practiced it, good luck with that. Making sure that mind training is a part of your program isn't something that I can emphasize too much. If at least 1/3 of your practice was in the mental training of yourself and the other 2/3 was physical, you would be doing better than most of the martial artists that I've ever run into. I prefer and do better with the 60-40 to 50-50 blend. 1 hour meditation, 1 hour movement. So put some time into your mindset, and you will receive great rewards in the long run. And number 5 could have been number 1, and these aren't necessarily listed in order. They're just, again, rooms that you could look into. Avoiding the fatal flaws. Now, this isn't rocket science. We all have blemishes, strengths, some things that we do well, some things others are better at. Fatal flaws are not those. Fatal flaws are the things that are almost unrecoverable from. For example, a quarterback can have great legs like Russell Wilson for the Seattle Seahawks, or not, like Phillip Rivers of the San Diego Chargers. A quarterback can be strong like Big Ben of the Steelers, or not so much like Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints. They're all different. They have their strengths. But the fatal flaw for any quarterback at any level is that you can't make bad decisions. You don't have to be the strongest, the fastest, or have the strongest arm. But if you throw the ball in the wrong place, you're going to get yanked and put on the bench. What about the fatal flaws of being a dad? You can keep all your promises or miss a few. You can be a great listener or not so much sometimes. But the fatal flaw as a dad is you cannot ever be abusive. That is a fatal flaw as a dad. It's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to recover from that. What is the fatal flaw of a martial artist? The fatal flaw of a martial artist, what could it be? Some are faster. Some are stronger. Some are much more clever. Some have a lot more belts. In combat, one fatal flaw of the martial artist is looking for technique to save you. The mind is too slow. It creates worry and anticipation. Now you're not one with yourself. That's a fatal flaw. It's going to be hard to recover from that. Another fatal flaw? Have a preconceived idea of how something's going to work. Or worse, you're not only going to make it work, you're going to make it look good when you make it work. Now you're doing movie kung fu, which there's nothing wrong with that. Just remember you're practicing in the movies. And I said in combat. What about the fatal flaw in the realm of your spiritual understanding, your self-development? Many times the fatal flaw is intellectualizing. The realm of your spirit and dreams do not operate by goals, objectives, time, calendars, or spreadsheets. Your spirit does not understand that. It knows symbols. It knows tendency. It knows need. It knows intention. It knows peace. It knows harmony. And it speaks in its own way. When you intellectualize the spirit, it gets lost. And then most martial artists will judge whether they are right or wrong before they even take the time to find out what's it trying to say. If you're unsure about what directions to take in 2015 with your training, then I hope that some of those things I share with you may give you some food for thought. They didn't come out of a science project and they didn't come out of a psychology manual. They came from a lot of training, a lot of practice, a lot of heartache sometimes, a lot of headaches sometimes, and trying to find out my way, to find out who I was, who I wanted to be. When you embrace that, you can start to see where you are, where you want to go, who you are, who you want to be in your practice. And as long as you're getting better, not only will you get better, you'll be happier. And if you get better and you get happier, then the people that you surround yourself with, your children, people you care about, your friends, they're going to get better too. Remember that a good martial artist, you always practice to hone both the spirit of the warrior, which is being prepared, and the spirit of the sage, which is being aware. The solution to that will be found in a sense of quietness. You will quit trying to be something you are not, or something that someone else told you should be. You'll become yourself, and you'll be a lot better for it. So what is the direction of your martial art practice? A summary. Have a good intent. Have good routines. Observe for milestones. Remember that the mind matters. You can go to Tibetan Kung Fu podcast number 13, The Scientific Reasons to Meditate, if you'd like more information on that. And then number 5, avoid the fatal flaws. So my personal intent for 2015 in regards to my Kung Fu. What is Sifu T.W. Smith going to be working on in this coming 6 months or so for sure? Provide my students with more direction and a better opportunity to learn. Stay consistent in my periodization or seasonal format to my training. Find new ways to apply my current knowledge as compared to trying to take in more. I want to keep my health great, my attitude guided, and my skills honed by the routines that I keep. Health, attitude, and skills. That's my personal Kung Fu for 2015. My routines. I just finished my nutritional take a break phase. I usually relax a little bit on the stringencies of my diet. I put more attention on my meditation during the time and a little bit more on some combat posting or combat meditational work. But now, as of this presentation, I'm on my fat boy diet. That's when I get about 5 or 6 pounds over where I'm supposed to be. That's where I institute certain routines. No calories 4 hours before bedtime. 1/3 of a cup of oatmeal for breakfast, then 3 hours of hunger. And it's good to be hungry. Keeps life going. Then I get in my 185 grams of protein during the day and a gallon of water. When I'm done with that phase, I'll go into my tighten it up phase and be ready for spring. I got my long staff, combat condition, and meditation will cycle through with my nutritional phases. And maybe I'll talk about that on another podcast. I know I went a lot longer than usual here, and I appreciate those of you who've stuck around for all this. I hope you find that the Martial Intent and Routine podcast is something that you can use throughout the course of the year. I'd love to hear some feedback from you and your thoughts. Remember to subscribe, leave a review over at iTunes, Stitcher. It helps other people find us. And we're going to continue to explore the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. This is Sifu T.W. Smith, and thank you so much for joining us today.